Senior Vice President, Wealth Management, and Senior Portfolio Manager with UBS Financial Services. And Alan did put some things of information for you on the seats. Next to Alan is Anne Frances Moore of Anne Frances Moore Fine Art Services, appraiser of fine and decorative arts. She holds an MFA in painting and has developed a career spanning as an art historian, museum curator, appraiser, and sometime dealer. I might have just given you a good job. And Richard Lehun of Stropheus Art Law, a specialist in fiduciary responsibility. And last but not least is Robin Antar, who hails from Brooklyn, is a sculptor and owner of Realism In Stone. She's an artist member of Salmagundi. Robin has become renowned for her lifelike sculptures of icons of American pop culture and has gallery representation at Pop Gallery in New York City, as well as galleries in Texas and California. Welcome to all of you. Annie had sent me this thing yesterday. It was a letter originally published as Poverty on September 29, 2000, and is always illustrated on the Painter's Keys website. And this is what they say about artists. A true artist must expect to be out of step with his times and live a life of public disdain and poverty. A commendable thought, I suppose, an almost usable quotation, written by a respected name in the arts. It has, however, a flaw. It's wrong. These sorts of statements are part of the popular and conventional knowledge penned by theorists and those who do not like to see us by Bentleys. They echo the Gauguin myth and bring on images of cold water garrets, bearded malcontents, and paupers' graves. It's lamented that the average annual income of artists is $7,000. The annual income of golfers from the avails of that activity would produce a similar figure if you included all those whose swing is less than acceptable. Here's how to stay out of the sand traps. Put in the same hours as a normally employed person. Approach your work in a workmanlike manner. Don't be shy about brushing up your techniques. Be open to new directions and avenues of growth. Learn how to gain joy from your work. Know that quality is always in style. Join in the dance of life and be happy. Trust your instincts and follow your passions. Find people with talents which complement yours. Don't let the peanut gallery get on your nerves. Keep your score. To be a true artist, you do not have to be poor. You have to be competent. So just as a note to start the season, I'm going to start with Richard. What are the important things to consider when dealing or negotiating with galleries or art buyers?
I think top of the list is to understand that we are in a changed marketplace. For the longest time, the model has been that an artist will complete their MFA, their BFA, and they will look for artist representation. And the gallerist was hopefully to be the guiding figure in that person, that young artist's life, to build their career. This still does happen to some degree, but in many cases, because of the influences of the art fairs, the speed with which art market transactions are happening, and the globalized art market, this relationship between the gallerist and the artist is not working the same way and may not even be as in the artist's interest as it may have been in the past. So, for example, we have the problem that gallerists can only bring so many artists to the art fairs. The art fairs, for example, are becoming a very key place where artists attain visibility. So, one of the things that artists need to consider is a diversification strategy. Don't put all hopes into an artist-gallerist relationship. Don't have the expectation that the gallerist is going to be an omniscient person who's going to be there for the medium to long run and is going to be responsible for the success or failure of an artist's career. Instead, artists have to be much more savvy today in terms of identifying where they can achieve the exposure to the group of people who would appreciate their work and be able to contextualize their work and make their work accessible and available to the people who can contribute towards their careers. So that's one of the most important things that we need to consider, is the shift in the artist-gallerist relationship. In addition to that, as a corollary to that, is the fact that, generally speaking, as Pat has already mentioned, the vast majority of artists don't make a lot of money, nor will they in the future. An artistic career, to be sustainable, also has to be economically diversified in terms of risk. I'm sure Alan will have a lot to say about that. This means that the vision that some artists have in concentrating on branded names who lead the press or lead a conceptualization of what a successful artist is, may not be really capable of understanding the challenges before them, because the false model may be the one blocking the true focus on the responsibilities that lead to sustainability. This will be my last point in response to this question. An artistic career is something that takes an enormous amount of time to develop. We're talking about anywhere from 10 to 30 years. In that period of time, irrelevant of how good or hard one works, there are going to be a lot of difficult periods. So the diversification, the thinking about diversification has to be there from the outset. When I'm talking to young artists at art schools, that's one of the first things I try to indicate is, how are you going to finance this long development trajectory? And how is that financing going to respond and interact with the shifting marketplace? I'm not saying to the artist, for example, you need to adapt your creativity to be more saleable. I say you have to adapt your understanding of the marketplace so that the work that you do can be visible to the right people and can integrate itself with the marketplace. And again, I'll close with the notion of sustainability. You have to, any artist today must sit down and understand that the path that they're on has to be sustainable. There has to be a way to deal with the risks, because there is no such thing as risks that don't at some point in some way manifest themselves. Risks are real, and you need a strategy to deal with them. So both in the sense of where are you going to get your money from? Diversification means finding some type of occupation that you can live off of, so that you, in a long continuous process, can continue to be productive, independent of the degree of market reception at one given time.
Thank you, Richard. And follow that with, what are the factors that establish prices in the auction and dealership markets?
Okay, I'm glad that Richard mentioned the changing model in the art world. That's indeed the case. I think anyone who's involved with this is well aware of that. You can no longer really count on having a dealer do it for you. The system doesn't work that way anymore. You can have an online presence, and I guess what I need to speak to really is what determines how much a picture should cost, right? When I do an appraisal, or when anyone who's a professional appraiser does an appraisal, we look at what's called comparables. We do a comparable market analysis. We look at preferably sales by the same artist's work in other venues, and if there is no sales data on a specific, the specific artist, we'll look at artists who are very similar and working within the same venues. I do this all the time for things like insurance values or for legal purposes, estates, all that kind of thing. But you've got to be very nimble when you get out there and market, and you have to know how to price your work. And one way you might price your work is to look at comparable sales. You can look at what's happened in small auction venues, for example. One way that you might think of to generate a market for yourself, I don't know if this has ever occurred to you before, but putting one work at a time, one or possibly two works at a time in a small auction somewhere that will take a painting that the estimate might be, $300 to $500. I'm thinking many of the things in this room might fall in that category. There are lots of sort of third-tier auction houses, not so much in New York City, but outside the city, who will put something out there. Those records, even from the most obscure auction house, gives you some kind of a sales record from which you can then build your reputation. I'm talking about this being very, very much of a self-starter yourself. If you can get a sales record going, you will not only generate sales and support the price structure of your own work, but you will also draw the attention of dealers and other people who who can really help your career get off the ground. So think about some of these small auctions. Even the Salmagundi auction is a good idea. I'm not sure that Salmagundi appears on the databases, but I know that the Cape Cod Artists Collaborative, I think on Cape Cod in Provincetown, I think it's Provincetown Art Association, their auction sales records are available to any appraiser and to any dealer who subscribes to the many databases that are now available. That's just one idea of how to do it, because when someone comes to me and says, how do I know how much my work is worth? More typically, I have an estate come to me, a family of an artist who's just deceased, and they say, my mother has hundreds of wonderful pictures. They're beautifully crafted. They elicit a lot of emotion from us. We really think they're terrific. And she was not a marketer. She never really sold her work. She never tried hard enough to sell her work. What should we do with this now? And you all realize, if you're an artist, you've got a problem at the end of your life with what to do with all those paintings. If you haven't, very few artists don't have this problem. So what I usually end up suggesting to people is this sort of small auction strategy. And they will again say, well, how do I know where to start? And I say, look at other things that are similar by unknown artists. You want to obviously know the artist's name, and you will know the name, but you want to have artists that do not have records. The other thing all of you should do is go on Ask Art. Are you familiar with this database website? It's for American artists, and although they're expanding and becoming more international. But they have wonderful information, artist biographies. They have categories of information on various artists. Of course, they sustain themselves by, having auction records that people like me subscribe to. But they have information on movements, people who are associated with other people, a wealth of information. You don't have to have a sales record to get your name up on Ask Art. I would suggest any artist do this, because now you're an artist of record. And if you can get even one sales record on there from an auction, you're off. When anyone looks at your work, they will say, well, this painting fetched $1,000, last summer. I guess I need to put that in my art dealership for $3,000. If they're a dealer and they could buy it at auction. It's a way of getting yourself out there and starting to establish a track record. Because appraisals are all about track records. These aren't numbers that we pull out of thin air. They are, we look at sales data and analyze it in order to arrive at monetary value.
Thank you. All right, this will go to you now, Alan, following Anne. What types of accounts and investments should artists look into or think about to provide a retirement income? If there is such a thing as a retirement income.
This reminds me of the point before about diversification. And as you go through your career as an artist, you want to have some diversification in providing a retirement income. So, point being, as you're able to sell some pieces and make some money during your career, I would suggest that it's important to set aside some money in accounts that are non-art related, that'll throw off income and make you comfortable, if you will. Depending on the way your business is organized, you can do several different things. There's a defined benefit plan. Obviously, you know, a self-employed IRA, which is great. These will allow you to put away larger sums of money, traditional IRA, Roth IRA, and so forth. So again, point being that I think we all want to be comfortable in retirement, and we hate to think about those days, but I think being smart and setting aside some money on an annual basis from your art sales is something that would certainly be worthwhile.
Thank you, Alan. So now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Robin, your recommendations for practicing artists is to appraise and insure all works before they leave the studio. Who do you get to appraise your work? Where do you go?
I got an appraiser that was recommended through my insurance company, so that way if there is a claim, which there was a few times, there's no problem. I get a check within a month or a couple weeks. In other words, I get somebody that the insurance company recognizes the name and they approve the appraiser, so there's no problems.
So then the appraised value is covered under the insurance. It determines the cost of the insurance.
Right, that's.
And does the insurance last for the period that the art is out of your studio, or is it long-term?
It's my work wherever it is in the U.S.
Okay.
I was going to say there are many different types of value, but what she's insured for is retail replacement value, which means what her work normally sells for in the marketplace. So that if she loses something, or more often something is damaged,
Right.
she's completely reimbursed for the value.
That's a good thing.
But the problem is, the more you insure, the higher your premium.
Yes, of course.
And for shipping, I have like a $10,000 deductible. And for works in a gallery, I have a $5,000 deductible. So the deductibles are huge, so I don't bother insuring a $2,000 piece.
Well, it all depends on your policy too. You
Right.
have to
Unless-
have many options when you.
Unless I have 20 pieces in a show, then I'll insure the $2,000 piece. But right now, everything's scattered all over the place.
I guess you do have to keep that other job.
I mean,
And,
the works are scattered all over the place.
yeah. And why do I see paintings not as good as mine selling for large sums when I can't get a sale?
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, this speaks to what I said before. You know, there are lots of different definitions of value. And I think, first of all, we have to separate out intrinsic value, which I would say are qualitative judgments that are made on the basis of craft or emotional response or, you know, the criteria that we use to say, you know, I like that painting more than I like that painting, you know, those kinds of qualitative issues. And monetary value. There's also emotional value. That's another kind of attachment that people oftentimes don't separate from monetary value. And monetary value is, again, established by a track record. You have to sell in order to sell. You know, you have to get some kind of some traction going somewhere. Very few people get picked up by a major dealer without ever having sold anything. Just kind of doesn't happen. So you need to be out there to some extent, and I know I'm the worst marketer myself in the world, but you have to be a marketer in order to get this kind of traction to start actually selling things. You have to be something other than the artist that you are, who's making works of art for internal reasons, and be someone who's willing to go out there and, put your ego on the line, put your work in auctions, show things. I mean, again, you've got to do things like this for starters. You absolutely have to do that. No one's going to come knocking on your door, especially if you're hiding in your studio.
Richard, what are the coming challenges in the marketplace that artists need to be conscious of?
I think that just what you were speaking to, the demands on artists today are unparalleled. You can do a lot, but only if you're prepared to embrace all of the responsibilities that go along with being an artist. Whereas there is often, for all artists, the hope of being able to do the thing you love in an uncompromised way for as long as you can, because that's the thing that really motivates you. Many artists today are confronting the fact that in order to do that, they need to do a multiplicity of things relatively well. Those include the types of things that I've mentioned, which means the type of financial planning that is involved with the question of sustainability, but it also means interacting in a very sophisticated way with other market actors. So the base challenge of that is how to create an artist's life that really can fulfill all of those requirements. So what would they be? For example, many artists don't recognize that even in order to get the kind of exposure that would lead to getting a gallery representation, that you have to actually be physically present in a gallerist's life and in the basically the context in which a gallerist is moving. That means you have to appear to have you have to have an organic overlap with the people that you're hoping to partner up with. And that is not the same thing as having great dedication to your work, creating great work. That's only part of the puzzle. The other part of the puzzle is actually finding those people in the world who can develop strong feelings for your output, for the capacity for you to continue doing that. And that doesn't necessarily come from the work itself. It comes from the emotional, intellectual, and social interactions with people. So the commitment to that, even though that sounds old school, is actually more significant at this point than ever before. There is a glut of people, particularly in New York, producing art. Some of that art is pretty good in the sense that it's not naive, it's not coming from some uninformed space, but is actually very competitive in and amongst the creators and the works in question. So the demands are to consistently produce quality work. That means both in terms of craftsmanship, but also in terms of just producing things that fascinate people, that emotionally move people, and are sophisticated in an art historical sense. At the same time, the major challenge now is to develop the type of persona that the art market actors can relate to. And so that's done personally in the one instance, and then I'll add the next dimension of it, which is marketing. Now, marketing is a very difficult thing for artists in many cases to identify with, because it has something of the aftertaste of crass self-aggrandization or representation, etc. Putting oneself in front of one's work as opposed to relying on one's work to actually speak for oneself. When we're talking about marketing today, if we just stay a little bit in dialogue with what I was talking about, being physically present in the lives of the people that you want to work with, this, by virtue of social media, experience is an extension. It means, are you present in the social media or in the online space in such a way that people can identify who you are, what you're doing, and understand why your work is valuable. That too takes a lot of work. It means having a sophisticated online social media interaction with industry actors, art context actors. This is work. Now, if you look at a lot of artists, particularly emerging artists' websites, they're kept very minimalistic because that's a little bit of a style, and also within a kind of putting the work in front of yourself. All of that is aesthetically appropriate, doesn't necessarily achieve what I'm talking about, which is using all the channels that are now available to us in order to communicate and using them professionally. Now, what does that mean? It means having a presence that's well organized, having a presence that maps onto the body of work that is easily capable of being interacted with, having an appropriate amount of biographical information, having events that connect up to the online presence, or trying to come to a situation where when you wake up in the morning as an artist, that you have enough time definitely to create, but you also spend a significant amount of quality time responding to the new challenges in terms of using the channels that are available in order to make the availability, the quality, and the intensity and the specialness of your production available to people who are very time poor and where you're competing with a lot of other people who are also working hard. And in order for that to be successful, you have to embrace a variety of challenges that traditionally have not mapped onto the artist's conception of the ethos of inspired focus on production of art itself.
Okay, so then, Richard, how does gallery representation still matter as much after the rise of the art fair? In the context that we discussed.
Sure, I'll give a slightly twisted answer to that, which is if we move away from the notion of the gallerist being the person that is going to facilitate everything, and to look at the gallerist or a number of gallerists, perhaps in different geographical regions or covering perhaps different bodies of work as potential partners towards shaping the direction that an artist embraces, or the direction that an artist feels comfortable pursuing because he or she is in dialogue with a peer, then we can see how the gallerist can, independent of whatever specific market development comes to the fore, can still be incredibly important. To go back to a question that we were discussing about valuation of artworks, experienced gallerists have a feeling for what a piece is worth. And if you're friends with them, even if they don't represent you, or at least acquainted with them, and they respect your work, you can ask a couple of these people who you've spent time getting to know and you actually have invested in to give you an opinion. And you can ask them to give you an opinion about the body of work where you are, or is there something that you could be doing, or something that you could be embracing that would be enriching to your practice and would be also accessible to the market. So what I'm saying is that the shifting roles of the gallerist doesn't mean that the gallerist must necessarily stop being very significant in terms of being supportive to an artist's work and career. But I think artists have to shift their perception of how they interact with those individuals in order to understand that it's not the same type of relationship where the gallerist is this kind of fixed, powerful figure, the artist is some type of supplicant, they come under the wings of the gallerist, and then there is an enormous amount of burden removed from the artist, and the artist can just simply go back to the struggle to produce good work.
Robin, as an artist, how would you respond to what Richard is talking about?
I was just going to respond. The problem with doing galleries and art shows or fairs is when you do a fair, everybody expects to get the work wholesale. You cannot sell your work for $1 for less than it's in a gallery. If you have a piece in a gallery for $10, I'm not selling it to you for $9.95, and I don't care if you're my Aunt Tilly or my brother. Because your reputation, with my work, especially with the market I'm dealing with, it's a small world. And you get one person to know that you undercut them, forget it. Your collective will never buy from you again. your reputation goes in the garbage. So what did I do? Is I came up with an entirely different line that everybody could afford. And I played a little marketing game. I did not make the pieces readily available. Basically, there's 6 pieces. I would introduce 6 pieces, but you got first one to call, it's gone. And in other words, I gave the attitude that there wasn't a large inventory, and I sold 100 of these things in a couple months. And I didn't make any money on it. It was a lost leader. But what I did was, I made the people pick it up from the studio. That way, they come, they buy something for $100. Now they see something for $3,000 or $1,500, and they're going to buy it. Because I don't do deliveries, but it's just the attitude shift that I made it like, well, you want it, there's only like 6 left. And I sent emails to some potential clients, and then I added a few friends on there as well, just to make the list a little longer. And all of a sudden, I want the blue one, I want the pink one, I want the red one, I want the other. It was fun, and you learn. I learned a lot. I didn't make much money on these lost leaders, but I learned the marketing strategy. So then when I had a client call me up like 6 months later, they wanted 25 sculptures and the wishy-washy, and I said, look, I got a production schedule, and if I want to put the stuff in the production schedule, you got to let me know whether you want the job. So I made it sound like their perception of me is not that I'm sitting back and I'm making 1 sale a year, that it's all in the eyes, the perception. I mean, I learned how to do that.
Thank you, Robin. And then, based on following Robin, what is your suggestion on how artists should price their work?
Well, again,
I think there's variable ways of doing it. What is your recommendation, or what?
Well, I think Richard had a very interesting observation about asking a gallerist for some advice. The gallery dealer or owner, excuse me, may not be interested in carrying your work, but she may know someone who might be interested in doing that. Things kind of tend to fall out in levels, and the main thing you need to do is get started, and you probably want to look around and be brutally honest with yourself about what your work compares to. In other words, do your own comparables. If you see something that's selling, excuse me, at a certain price point that's similar to your work, and the artist has a similar reputation, then you can pretty much guess that's what it should be. Could you come back to me?
Sure. I'll come back to you. Alan, give Anne a moment. This is a 2-part question. What are the differences in investing in art versus investing in securities? Well, follow that way. Can I borrow against my art pieces versus borrowing against securities?
Well, easily both points talk about liquidity. How can we turn the art into liquid assets? How can we borrow against the art? How can we buy things using art? How can we sell art to fund our other endeavors, if you will? So, point being, we are one of the few firms that will actually lend against art, an art portfolio. So, a person or entity can bring in a portfolio of art, have it valued professionally, and then we can decide how much we will lend against that art to buy other art pieces or fund other projects. So I think this is a very common issue for artists and art collectors. So that's the first part. Second part is we're talking about liquidity. What's the difference between investing in art and investing in securities? We all understand that we love the art, it's beautiful, it means so much to us, and our family and so forth and so on, and how do we turn it into cash? How do we turn that into income? How do we provide retirement with that? We know we can't. The problem is the valuation of art. Art is valued once every 6 months, a year, 7 years. Securities are valued every day, either all day on the national exchange or at the end of the day, mark to market, we call it. So, again, turning those securities into cash, ready cash, providing an income stream is much easier. So again, quite frankly, it talks about diversification. Art is your vocation, art is your love, and that's great. But at the same time, I think it's very important, and I'm sure you'll agree, to set aside some funds in liquid assets of some sort.
Okay.
I think you have to be selling at quite a high level before you could actually use your own portfolio to borrow against, no?
I would doubt it.
I mean, you would have to be a major player in the art world,
I
no?
would doubt
You wouldn't doubt
it.
it?
No. They're not going to lend against anybody.
No, of course not. So I think if you're selling things at 500, 1,500, 3,000, I don't think you're going to have much luck in borrowing against a body of your work, is what I'm saying.
Robin is a working artist. You sent in to me, because I asked them questions ahead of time. It's not that I'm this brilliant, I'm really not. I kind of cheat along the way and asked them to present some questions to me. But Robin, you had said something about a UCC filing, et cetera. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I learned about this a long time ago. I was dealing, I don't want to mention names, but I was dealing with a gallery or a store, and I didn't trust the guy for bupkis. And I'm talking to my father who's in retail, and he goes, hello, UCC. Because I've been showing in galleries for years. I never did this. What is it? So I learned what it is, and ever since then, if anything is more than $3,000 or $4,000, I go through the expense, because I got to hire an attorney to file the UCC with the state of which the work is at. Excuse me.
Must be contagious.
I had a show in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I get a phone call from the landlord. I got your work under lock and key. He said, excuse me, I filed a UCC with the state of New Mexico. I got my work back. I did have to pay the return shipping, which the gallery was supposed to pay, but at least I got $30,000 worth of work back. So I learned, anything important, do not send out without a UCC, because it's a gamble.
What is UCC?
Well, that's a lawyer's going to do that.
So Richard, could you answer that?
Sure. Art is considered an object in trade like a chair or a table, according to the law. So it's subject to what's called the Universal Commercial Code. And the issue here is that if I give if this were an artwork and I give it to another person and that person runs a gallery, they have creditors. And if that gallerist defaults, then those creditors want recourse. So typically they're going to look to the stock. So for example, if there was a store went bankrupt, the creditors would try and at least get the cash register or the shelving or anything that could be found in that store and try to sell it and get some recourse. Now, what does a gallerist have other than white walls and art? I mean, not a lot. So typically in states that don't have sophisticated art law, New York does, we'll return to that in a second, the art could be considered something like the shelving and the cash register, so that if that gallerist defaults, then the creditor will want the art and try and sell the art in order to make up the loss. Now in New York, we have a statute that by law makes the artwork, the title does not pass to the gallerist in New York by law. There is a very complicated exception to that, but the two people, the artist and the gallerist, would have to contract specifically around that provision. So here in New York, it's not as critical. In fact, it's not necessary to do a UCC filing in most cases, but in other states where it's not it's not a statute that says the title doesn't pass. You can get into a situation like here in New Mexico where the gallerist defaults, the landlord comes in and wants to take the property and sell it. So there, without the UCC filing, which is an official document that indicates that the title of the painting does not belong to that gallerist in New Mexico. It belongs to you. And that's on file so that if a landlord or a creditor wanted to assess what recourse was available, the UCC filing would show them clearly and unmistakably that they could not have recourse to the art that is so registered with the UCC filing. So again, just to close it, the UCC filing is advisable in those jurisdictions where there isn't the same type of protection we have for artists in New York in terms of the passage of title towards artwork. So you have, just to close the concept out, possession and title. If I give my watch to Anne, for example, she holds it in her hand, but it's my watch. I have title, she has possession. In a place where that is not as clearly defined, it could be that Anne could hold out that the watch belongs to her and I would have less recourse. So that's just the division between possession and title.
Would that come into play when an artist sends their work, it's got accepted, let's say, in California, and it's going to be on exhibit for 2 months? Would you then recommend a UCC?
Well, you mean accepted, it's taken up by a gallerist in order to be shown in
To
the
be in
gallery?
a show, yes.
I'd have to check exactly what the current state of the law is in California, but if California didn't have a comparable statute to New York, a UCC filing is a strong protection. It is, however, at the same time, a very self-defensive act. It basically imputes to the gallerist the possibility that they will default and that you're protecting yourself against their default. Now, that's something that people react to differently. And it also depends on the relationship between the artist and the gallerist, etc. And for example, when the discussion about something like that is broached, all these things, if attorneys are present, well-meaning, qualified art law attorneys are present early on in the discussion, they can raise these things potentially raise them neutrally. If it comes, which is often the case, that an artist and a gallerist have been negotiating for a while and getting to know each other, developing a relationship, and just before the works would be sent out, there would be this assertion on the part of the artist that this type of security needs to be in place. That could be perceived as disruptive. Because a lot of relationships, as we know, between gallerists and artists are very subjectively driven. They're driven by the preferences of the individuals, beliefs, and the commonality between the individuals. So my recommendation is that if there are things like uncertainties vis-a-vis the jurisdiction, the rules involved in sending artwork to another state, consult a qualified attorney and have those considerations present early on so that they can be resolved calmly and neutrally, and by no means come as a surprise to anybody.
Right. You, and what you want to say.
Very often, art dealers go out of business and are bankrupt. You know, they've put their, their reputation, their money on the line to represent artists whose work they can believe in, but that doesn't always translate into sales. They too are challenged to market. They too are challenged, to make the right judgment calls about what work has meaning and has meaning to a contemporary audience. So I think I'm asking for a little bit of sympathy for dealers here because, they really are extending themselves to artists that they believe in, and very few of them are doing it solely from a motivation that has to do with money. Far more often, it has to do with believing in an artist's work.
So is that then why you see sometimes different prices on the same artwork?
You mean at a single dealer at a particular?
I don't know. Would it be the same dealer? Or why do sometimes you see the same piece at a different price?
You mean online or with a
Yes.
different dealer? It depends,
Whatever.
well, it depends on how it's being marketed. If it were with a different dealer, you know, different dealers have different strategies for how to make a sale, for starters. You know, it may depend on the venue. If you're doing it at a more public type of auction, maybe, you know, the artist is setting a price online for something. So, you know, that can certainly vary. It wouldn't vary so much with an appraiser, because an appraiser by definition tries to be objective and tries to use as much data as possible and back it up with a reasoned analysis. But certainly when anyone can put any price on anything in the open marketplace.
Okay. So Robin, going back to you as a practicing successful sculptor, is there any advice that you have for artists in keeping track of all expenses or income, sales tax collection? What would your recommendation be to an emerging artist to set, basically, you're setting up a business?
You have to have a separate checking account, obviously. If you want to get incorporated, if you want to protect yourself, get an LLC and give someone else 2% partner. As far as keeping books and records, QuickBooks. Use QuickBooks. If you spend $10 on stone, you sell the thing for $1,000, you paid an employee $3 an hour. Keep track of the employer, what project they did during their time, keep track of the expense. My studio happens to be in my living quarters, so I don't really separate the electric bill and the utility bill and the phone bill. But I would keep all of that track, because you have to keep track of the cost of running a business. It's not just a stone for $3 and you sell it for $1,000. You got your PR, you got your publicist, you got your web service, there's a ton of insurance. You just got hit with an $8,000 insurance bill. All that gets incorporated in all your sales, and it's not just like you bought a stone and you're selling it for so much more, and people will be you're asking $20,000 for that, but hello, it took how many months to produce, and you got to keep track of everything. If you don't keep track of it, you're not going to know whether you make money at the end of the day. When I did the Lost Leaders, I'm selling these things for $100, I thought I was making money. Then when I realized I'm paying people with workman's comp and disability, I wasn't making any money.
So all those things come into play when it comes to pricing your work then also.
Right, you have to include all the variables. It's not just the paint and the canvas.
Right. So is there anything else that one of you would like to add to this discussion that we haven't covered?
I'd like to add that I think Robin is an amazing artist in that, and I haven't seen her work, but that she's so much of a businesswoman, you know, that she's on top of all of these things. I think, you know, typically artists really aren't, because, you know, they're not what's driving most artists, right? But she's disciplined enough to make this happen, and that's why she can make money doing what she loves, because she's willing to spend some time doing that kind of work, and I think
You have to spend just as much time in the studio as you do in the office.
yeah, and discipline yourself with the time. Do you have a certain number of hours per day that you say, I'm going to be a businesswoman, I'm going to do my financial work, I'm going to market during this time? Or do
What's
you just...
going on? I mean, I just had to negotiate a contract back and forth. I still got some loose ends I got to figure out, so I'm stuck in the office. Once I do go down to the studio, like if I make that a studio day, I skip the office that day, because I just my brain isn't there. So it's either an office day or a studio day.
I would like to open this to the audience now. Does anybody have any questions for any of our panelists?
artists will decide how much to sell it for online sticks.
I have my stuff online, maybe, if I Google my name, probably about 40 different sites. But you know what, I never got a sale from any of them. But I just got a gallery connection with somebody from Italy recommended me to someone else. And to me, that was exciting because it means my name's getting out there. So whether they buy it or not, on these sites is not really important. It's getting your name out there, making a brand.
People often say that about shows too. Just because something doesn't sell in a show doesn't mean it's not worthwhile doing it, because things can come back years later.
You had a question.
Pre-recession, pre-2008, you establish a price point for your work. After that happens, you're having a really tough time maintaining that price point. Any advice for that? Do you come down? Do you reevaluate where your price?
I never lower my price. I'll come up with a new item. I came up with a new decorative line. Okay, so if somebody doesn't want to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a sculpture, they can buy a bowl for $200 or $6,000, or a silk saw for $100. Get them in the studio. Now I got a gimmick coming up for Father's Day. I'm trying to retail for $36. Just to get people in the studio. It's a
I think
gimmick.
that speaks to the psychology of collecting. I see over and over again, people have repeat artists in their collections because they fall in love with an artist's work, or they simply like the aesthetic and want to continue it throughout their home. I think she's so right. Get them in on a lower price level and they may grow into something much more major.
Yeah, well, that's what happens. They start lines up for 100. Oh, I see this bowl for 15. Oh, I like that. Oh, that fruit's that. And then before you know it, they bought 4 pieces of yours. But it takes time, and you have to prove to them, by them keep going to your studio, you have to build the relationship. But you got to get them in the door with the cheap item first.
Anyone else? Yes.
What about insuring these overseas? You talked about insuring within the United States, but what happens if you're showing something not in the continental United States?
You're asking who? Not me. I don't know the answer. Because I'm looking into that.
Ann or Richard, you have an answer?
If I understood correctly, you're asking whether insurance for your work when it leaves the country is advisable?
Is it possible?
There's insurance possible for anything. It's just a question of whether it's worth it. And again, to answer the question somewhat indirectly, I get, or I have received in the last 2 years from A-list galleries in the city calls about stranded artworks in Europe that are sitting out in the street in crates at 2 in the morning. And I ask the question, have you insured those works? And there is silence on the telephone. Luckily, in every case thus far, the works have been recovered because basically we found somebody who could drive there with a truck and collect the works off the street. But we're talking A-list galleries, and we're talking works that anywhere between $300,000 and $500,000. So the short answer is you can really insure anything, and many people don't, but that can be incredibly stressful and unnecessary. However, the insurance can be expensive. It depends. An insurer is not inexperienced at what they do. If a gallerist is sending works into a place, or an artist is selling works to a place where the legal considerations, like the issue of possession and title, are not clear, or the destination is not a gallery that has a strong business presence or a long-standing tradition. There are comparable forms of registration depending on the European jurisdiction. The vehicle of the UCC registration is an old, tried and tested method in commercial law. Basically, again, if you give over an expensive piece of equipment and you lend it to somebody who is doing something on a property, you don't want your bulldozer to disappear because that land developer has gone bankrupt, or your steam shovel or whatever. So we're not talking about particularly complicated legal vehicle. This is a standard practice, so it is available typically in all legal jurisdictions around the world, but you need to hire an attorney, competent attorney, who's able to do that on location. So your work is valuable enough, or even emotionally, or in terms of your career important enough, I can repeat it again. Go see a competent legal counsel who is an art lawyer. And that's another thing I have to say. Whether one's uncle or father or brother-in-law is a good lawyer for some matters, there are very few competent art lawyers in the country. A lot of them are in New York. I know a good number of them. They're very nice people. They're very easy to talk to. They have the specialized knowledge. And that's the kind of people we need to turn to when we have these questions.
I want to thank the panel. They were very interesting. What I'd like to do, I'm so delighted Alan gave us something about himself. Could I have your cards or some information about those people who are not Alan? Because I'd like to take them home as a reference. Will you have cards? Maybe you could leave it up front or something.
Oh, absolutely. You can go up and shake
I
their
don't want to
hand.
go up. I don't want to go up.
No, you're welcome. You're
I'm
all
not sure
welcome
other
to
people-
go up and shake their hands and get their
I'm
information.
not doing that now, but I would like to have it before.
I have one question. Alan, can you tell us a little bit about over $50 billion worth of art has been transacted, the TAFAF report. How do you see this bubble developing? I mean, you see a lot of it.
I think you're going to see more of it. I think you're in an environment where there's no inflation. When you start to bring inflation into hard assets, including art, you're going to see the value skyrocket. And you're going to see the clamoring for capital. So, point being, we talk about lending, we talk about $50 billion transaction. It's just going to get bigger and bigger until the bubble bursts. We know at some point. But you're going to see this continuance. There's no question about it. No question.
I also happen to feel that it's a bubble that will eventually burst. It's not going to be tomorrow, but it will. I mean, in that stratosphere we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about ask art. You said that we should get our name out there. So how does that work? You just write to them and say?
Well, you go on the internet, and the web address is www.askart.com, and there's a field that you can click on that will allow you to register yourself as an American artist.
I have one more of that as well.
Sure.
An important thing to remember is that there are scams in the city, both in New York and elsewhere, where someone will claim to set up a gallery or claim to broker some type of presence at an art fair, and you're expected for their expenses to pay a fee, whether the fee is $500 or $5,000 or $2,000. Almost inevitably, these things are scams. There was a scam that was just shut down last year that we were nominally involved in helping to shut down. So if anybody is out there asking you for money to show your work, this is typically not really the way it works, and you should be highly suspicious. There are artist collectives that do show work, and they will socialize the costs of running a gallery, but that's a different thing, and you have to be very clear about investigating how and what monies are being used in what way. No, I'm arguing strongly against it, but I do know that there are collectives who do this equitably, but I think that this would be extremely rare and is unlikely. It's much more likely to be a scam, and I'll turn it over to you to explain why you don't pay.
Well, I guess because my parents are retailers, but I always felt if I'm filling up your store with inventory, why should I pay you money? I'm giving you free goods, free merchandise to offer your clients. Why should I give you money? If you don't believe in the product, don't sell it. In fact, I should charge you money to own the product. How do you like that? Because 9 out of 10 times you show work in a gallery. I just had to spend $1,000 last week because I had a piece in a gallery. It got destroyed. He let everybody touch it. The label got all filthy dirty. And I'm trying to make a decision now. Do I want to fight with this guy and mail him the bill? Or don't want to tell my others, let's split it 50-50, so it's no big deal, $500 each person. I mean,
Mail the
what's that?
bill, send in the bill.
Anyone else? Well, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the auction houses in the lower tier. You mentioned the one in Cape
Well, the
Cod.
Provincetown Auction Association, the Provincetown Art Association is a little different. It's more like Salmagundi. And it does do an annual summer auction, and that's the one that gets onto ASCAR. I wonder if you could get the Salmagundi sales records on the databases. I think that's possible, actually.
I may have the answer for you. Can Tim or Robert answer that? Our esteemed leaders.
Robert Pillsbury. By the way, thank you very much for sharing with us here tonight, this afternoon. As far as getting auction records, we have a relationship with live auctioneers.
Oh, good.
And
Then it
basically,
should be on there.
when we do our auctions and you sell or don't sell through the auction, those records are available through live auctioneers.
Great.
So it's just an automatic thing that takes place when we have our auctions.
So some of you may already be listed on an auction database.
That's correct.
But I would encourage you nevertheless to get yourself out there on something like Ask Art. That is the modern way of becoming a listed artist. And you can actually do it yourself these days. So, you know, you don't have to know the author of that enormous tome anymore. You can do it yourself.
Right. So for anyone who may not know this artwork in this gallery now is the start of our spring auction. Our first auction is Friday night at 8 o'clock, and it works very easily. It's very simple. From 1 to 75, from there to where that sign ends, will be Friday night, March 13th. From this section down to almost that column will be March 20th, and then the rest of the room, hopefully these walls will be empty on March 20th, 27th.
27.
Oh yeah, my math, I'm sorry. It's an exciting auction. I worked it last year. I'm working it again. We have a lot of fun. If I have to say anything about this place, this is all about fun. We're not all serious artists. We try, but we do have a lot of laughs and a lot of camaraderie. And I want to just introduce tonight our board chairman, Tim. He's sitting there, and you just met Robin Pillsbury, our president, our fearful leaders. We have laughs. So I want to thank you all for coming, and I really want to thank